And we're back on Business Tonight.
Okay, the government's reform drive looks to be in a fast-forward mode. Really, there seems to be reforms seem to have been fast-tracked. And latest all reforms have given a big boost to the economy and markets at large. For more on the reform push and its broader implications, we're joined by Montek Singh Ahluwalia, Deputy Chairman of the Planning Commission, and Adi Godrej, President of the CII and Chairman of the Godrej Group. I want to get an industry view first in partial diesel deregulation is what has happened, Mr. Godrej. Given the broader implications of the move, would you go on to call this the most impactful reform that we've seen of late?
No, I wouldn't call it the biggest reform, but it's an important reform. The first increase in diesel prices, to my mind, was a good step. And this decision to take a monthly hike to end up in a year or thereabouts to a situation where there is no subsidy is a good step. I think it will have good results. It's already been welcomed, and I think the reaction of the stock market and other reactions have been very positive.
Mr. Ahluwalia, most say, the intention is good, but the government should not have sort of done this in a phased manner, should have perhaps gone ahead and deregulated it completely. Would you agree?
I think this notion of get rid of subsidy as if it was some fundamentalist kind of demand, this is not the correct way of looking at it. I mean, the fact of the matter is that we do have in our plan a total envelope for subsidies. We want to reduce the size of the subsidy as a percent of GDP in order to finance other kind of expenditure. Within that envelope, there are many other subsidies, like food subsidy, for example, which are much better targeted. So frankly, the idea is to get rid of those subsidies that are not targeted. And secondly, in the case of energy, it's by and large very desirable not to subsidize energy, because if you subsidize energy, you do not give the right signal in terms of economizing on energy. And it's very important in the medium run, if you want to have energy security, that you limit the demand for energy as much as possible. You can't do that if you're subsidizing the price.
Right. Mr. Godrej, I'd like to ask you, should the government not have gone ahead and deregulated diesel completely? What are your thoughts instead of that current partial deregulation? After all, fuel retailers are at liberty to hike prices only by a marginal amount.
No, I think this gradual decontrol is a better move, because a one-time move would have had a tremendous negative impact on inflation at one time, etc. So I think this gradual move, to my mind, is more appropriate.
But, Montek Singh Ahluwalia, what's your sense? Do we run the same risk like in petrol when prices are deregulated, but an in principle political nod is required every time prices need to be hiked?
I think the issue of diesel, how much difficulty there will be depends on when we fully absorbed the increase that takes it up to what is an appropriate level. I think that once that's achieved, the sort of month-by-month adjustment, which would sometimes go up and sometimes go down, would actually be quite easy. Now, I think in petrol that has been achieved. And people are used to a certain price of petrol, and the price goes up, the price comes down. In diesel right now, I mean, it can only go up because there's a huge under-recovery. But when the diesel price is finally adjusted, then I think companies will have greater freedom to move the price up or down.
Mr. Godrej, I want to ask the same question to you as well, because I'm hoping for a more frank answer. Do you also fear that diesel could be headed the petrol way, where despite being deregulated, every time prices need to be revised or in a sense increased, a political nod is required?
No, ultimately we should totally deregulate, but petrol is in effect deregulated. I agree that it still needs okay from the ministry every time, but it's in effect there is no subsidy in petrol.
Mr. Ahluwalia, the one big fear in increasing diesel prices is that it has an inflationary impact. How do you think this phased hike will impact inflation? Is there a fear of prices perhaps shooting up?
I don't, by the way, share this view that a price increase is necessarily always inflationary. That seems to suggest that if you were to lower the price, inflation would come down. That's just nonsense. I mean, what happens when you raise the diesel price is surely the diesel price goes up. But to the extent to which purchasing power is pulled out of the system in order to consume the same amount of diesel, the pressure on other prices is reduced. I think there are a lot of studies that Kirit Parikh recently produced a study that said that, if you raise the price of diesel, then initially there may be a slightly higher price, but in the medium term, inflation will be less. Whereas if you don't raise the price of diesel, you'll end up with more inflation. So frankly, I think the need to adjust is not something you shouldn't do because of inflation. It is sensible to make the adjustment gradually. I mean, what this really means is you shouldn't get yourself in a position where you're too far out of line. I mean, had we done this 2 years ago, we would not have had the present problem.
Right, so have we now completely averted any possibility of a downgrade?
I don't think that downgrades are done because of particular instruments. I mean, I think downgrading issues are always related to the judgment about the overall fiscal situation, and I think we have many instruments to control the fiscal situation. It's certainly true that to the extent to which the diesel price hike suggests that in this dimension we will not be under fiscal pressure except over the next several months, that the situation is normalizing, this will certainly be interpreted by people as strengthening the underlying fiscal situation. But they would take a look at many other things also, so it's not just the diesel price.
Mr. Godrej, last word to you then. In light of these reforms, do you think, would you agree with Montek Singh Ahluwalia? Do you think the government has now averted the possibility of a downgrade?
No, I think a downgrade is unlikely now because the reform process is moving forward quite strongly. And I think even from the fiscal deficit point of view, this decision will mean that in a year's time the fiscal deficit will be contained to low levels.
All right, gentlemen, we leave it at that. Many thanks for coming in and really sharing your viewpoint with us on the show this evening.
Still ahead on Business Tonight, Salman Khan makes a blockbuster entry into retail, unveils the first flagship store for his clothing brand Being Human.
And this is a revelation of another kind. Tainted cyclist Lance Armstrong comes clean in an interview with Oprah Winfrey. It's up to that when we're back.